The security camera footage was crystal clear. 3 children climbing over his fence at 6:47 a.m., trampling his newly planted garden, while their mother stood on the sidewalk filming him with her phone. This is child abuse. Karen screamed as David finally snapped and did what no neighbor had dared to do in 15 years. What happened next would expose secrets that would destroy her perfect suburban facade forever, and turn the entire neighborhood against the woman they'd all been. Too terrified to confront, David Chen pressed his face against the cool kitchen window, watching his dream die one muddy footprint at a time. 3 children, couldn't be older than 8, 10, and 12, were using his backyard as their personal playground again. The youngest had discovered his prized tomato seedlings and was systematically crushing them underfoot, giggling as green stems snapped like tiny bones. That's it. The words came out as a growl. David had spent 2 years planning this garden, 3 months preparing the soil, and every penny of his savings buying organic seedlings from the specialty nursery 40 miles away. His grandmother's heirloom tomato varieties, smuggled from Taiwan. Decades ago, lay scattered like casualties across the torn earth. He yanked open the sliding door with enough force to rattle the frame. "Hey, get out of my yard." The children froze mid-destruction, their faces turning toward him with the practiced innocence of career troublemakers. The oldest, a gap-toothed boy with mud streaked across his cheek, actually had the audacity to smile. "We are just playing, mister. In MY backyard. On MY property. Destroying MY garden." David stepped onto his deck, his voice rising with each word. "Where are your parents?" The middle child, a girl with tangled blonde hair, pointed toward the fence that separated his property from a sidewalk. "Mommy said we could play here." Through the chain link, David could see her. Karen Whitmore stood on the public sidewalk, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold with the satisfaction of someone who'd orchestrated every moment. Even from 30 feet away, he could see her smug expression. "Your mother doesn't own this property," David called out, his hands clenched into fists. "I do. And you're trespassing." Karen's voice carried across the yard with the sharp authority of someone accustomed to getting her way. "It's just children playing, David. Don't be such a monster." Monster. The word hit him like a physical blow. 3 years of escalating harassment. 3 years of being painted as the neighborhood villain. 3 years of having his complaints dismissed by everyone from the homeowners association to the police, all because he dared to ask that children respect his property boundaries. "They're destroying my garden." David shouted back, gesturing at the carnage around his feet. 73 tomato plants, each one carefully nurtured from seeds his grandmother had brought from the old country. "Gone. Gardens grow back," Karen replied with a shrug that made David's vision blur with rage. "Childhood doesn't. Maybe if you had kids of your own, you'd understand." The comment was a blade twisted in an old wound. David and his ex-wife had tried for 8 years to have children. 8 years of fertility treatments, failed pregnancies, and slowly watching their marriage crumble under the weight of their shared grief. Karen knew this. The whole neighborhood knew this, because his ex-wife had confided in Karen's sister-in-law during their brief friendship. "Get them out," David said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than his. Earlier shouting, "Get them out now, or I'm calling the police." Karen laughed, actually laughed, and pulled out her phone. "Go ahead, call them. I'm recording this whole interaction. Let's see what they think about a grown man terrorizing innocent children." The red recording light on her phone felt like a target painted on his chest. David realized with sick certainty that no matter what he said or did next, Karen would edit the footage to make him look like the aggressor. She'd done it before with other neighbors. The Martinez family had moved away last year rather than deal with her campaign of harassment after their dog had allegedly barked too loudly. "You have 60 seconds to get your children off my property," David said, forcing his voice to remain steady. "Or I'm filing a police report for trespassing and property destruction." 60 seconds. Karen's voice rose to the theatrical pitch she reserved for her most dramatic performances. "Did everyone hear that? This man just threatened my children. He's clearly unstable." David looked around, realizing for the first time that they'd drawn an audience. Mrs. Patterson from across the street stood in her doorway, her disapproval evident even at a distance. The Johnsons were watching from their window, whispering to each other behind partially closed curtains. Even old Mr. Reeves had emerged from his house, probably hoping for entertainment with his morning coffee. All of them watching. All of them judging. All of them seeing exactly what Karen wanted them to see: a bitter, childless man picking on innocent children and their protective mother. But none of them had lived through 3 years of this psychological warfare. None of them had watched their property values drop because potential buyers were warned about the difficult neighbor who hated children. None of them had endured the constant stream of complaints to the HOA about everything from his lawn, height to his paint color, to the threatening way he looked at Karen's family. The youngest child, a boy who couldn't have been more than 7, chose that moment to grab a handful of soil from David's demolished herb garden and fling it directly at the sliding glass door. The dark earth splattered against the pristine glass like a Rorschach test of David's slowly fragmenting sanity. "Sweetie, don't do that," Karen called out, her tone suggesting mild amusement rather than genuine correction. "Mr. Chen doesn't like when children have fun." David felt something snap inside his chest, like a rubber band stretched beyond its breaking point. He pulled out his phone and began recording. "State your name and the date," he said, his voice now calm with the eerie composure of someone who'd finally reached his limit. Karen's confident smirk faltered slightly. "What?" "State your name and today's date. For the record." "I don't have to do anything for you," Karen replied, but uncertainty crept into her voice. "Karen Elizabeth Whitmore," David said clearly into his phone. "July 15th, 2024. Currently allowing her 3 children to trespass on my property and destroy approximately $700 worth of heirloom plants while filming me and making false accusations." False accusations. Karen's voice reached a new octave. "Everyone can see you're harassing my family." David continued recording, his camera capturing the destroyed garden, the children still standing amid the wreckage, and Karen's increasingly frantic demeanor. "The children entered my property without permission by climbing over the fence at approximately 6:47 a.m. They have systematically destroyed my vegetable garden, herb garden, and flower beds. When asked to leave, the mother refused and instead began filming me while making inflammatory statements. You can't record my children." Karen shrieked, suddenly lunging toward the fence. That's illegal." "Actually," David said with a smile that felt foreign on his face, "I can record anyone on my property and anything visible from my property. It's called the Plainview Doctrine. You should look it up." For the first time in 3 years, Karen Whitmore looked uncertain. The phone in her hand wavered slightly, and David caught the moment when she realized she might have finally pushed too far. But David was just getting started. He'd spent 3 years documenting every incident, every complaint, every piece of evidence of Karen's systematic harassment campaign. 3 years of playing defense while she controlled the narrative. Today, that changed. David walked to his garden shed and retrieved a piece of equipment he'd hoped he'd never have to use, a portable megaphone he'd bought after the last HOA meeting where Karen had shouted him down. He switched it on, and the electronic squeal made everyone in the vicinity wince. "Attention neighbors," his amplified voice boomed across the suburban morning quiet. "I want everyone to witness what's happening here. Karen Whitmore's children have trespassed on my property and destroyed my garden. When I asked them to leave, she refused and instead chose to film me while making false accusations." Windows that had been cracked open suddenly flew wide. Doors opened. The morning joggers stopped mid-stride. David now had the audience Karen had always commanded, but for the first time, he controlled the narrative. "This has been going on for 3 years, David continued, his voice carrying across the entire neighborhood. 3 years of harassment, false complaints, and intimidation tactics designed to drive me from my home. I have documentation of every incident, every lie, every attempt to manipulate the situation." Karen's face had gone white. "Turn that off. You're disturbing the peace." "Disturbing the peace." David's laugh echoed through the megaphone with distorted intensity. "Let's talk about disturbing the peace, Karen. Let's talk about the 17 noise complaints you filed against me in the past year, all during normal daytime hours. Let's talk about how you coached your children to tell the police I looked at them funny when I was watering my plants. Let's talk about how you spread rumors that I was a registered sex offender to prevent the Hendersons from buying the house next door." The gathered neighbors began Officer Martinez stepped out of his patrol car with the weary expression of someone who'd responded to this address too many times. At 42, he'd seen enough domestic disputes to recognize the warning signs of a situation about to explode. But as he surveyed the scene, David Chen standing calmly beside his destroyed garden, Karen Whitmore clutching her phone like a weapon, and a cluster of neighbors watching from what they hoped was a safe distance, something felt different about this call. Mr. Chen, Martinez nodded, pulling out his notepad. You reported trespassing and property destruction. That's correct, officer. I have video evidence and multiple witnesses. David's voice carried none of the desperate edge Martinez remembered from their previous encounters. This was a man who'd found his footing. Karen immediately stepped forward, her phone thrust toward Martinez like a shield. Officer, I need to file a complaint against this man. He threatened my children and used some kind of loudspeaker to harass them. I have it all recorded. Martinez glanced between them, noting the stark difference in their demeanor. In previous calls, David had been frustrated, emotional, struggling to articulate his complaints while Karen presented herself as the reasonable victim. Today, their roles seemed reversed. Let's start with the facts, Martinez said, clicking his pen. Mrs. Whitmore, where are your children right now? Karen gestured vaguely toward the fence line, where her 3 children stood in awkward silence, mud streaked across their clothes and guilty expressions painted on their faces. They were just playing, like children do. This man completely overreacted. Playing where, exactly? Martinez asked, his trained eye already cataloging the scene. The destroyed garden was impossible to miss. 70+ plants torn from the earth, soil scattered across David's deck, and tiny footprints creating a clear trail of destruction. In the yard, Karen's voice faltered slightly. Whose yard? Well, technically his, but Mrs. Whitmore, Martinez interrupted, his tone sharpening. Are you admitting that your children were on Mr. Chen's property without permission? David watched Karen's face cycle through expressions, confusion, anger, calculation, before settling on indignation. Children play, officer. That's what they do. They don't understand property lines and boundaries like adults do. But you do understand them, Martinez replied. And you're responsible for supervising your children. I was supervising them. I was right here. Martinez looked pointedly at the fence separating David's backyard from the public sidewalk. You were supervising them from the sidewalk while they were in someone else's yard destroying their property. For the first time, Karen seemed to realize the hole she was digging. They weren't destroying anything. They were just playing. David stepped forward calmly. Officer Martinez, may I show you the evidence? Martinez nodded, and David led him to the garden beds. The destruction was methodical, not the accidental damage of children running through a yard, but the deliberate demolition of someone systematically uprooting and crushing plants. These are heirloom tomato varieties, David explained, kneeling beside the wreckage. Each plant cost $12, plus soil amendments, fertilizer, and 3 months of care. The total damage is approximately $850. Martinez whistled low under his breath. That's approaching felony territory for property destruction. The color drained from Karen's face. Felony. They are just plants. Expensive plants, Martinez corrected. Mr. Chen, you mentioned video evidence. David pulled out his phone and showed Martinez the footage he'd captured. The video clearly showed the 3 children climbing over the fence, with Karen visible in the background watching and filming. Their systematic destruction of the garden was undeniable. I also have security camera footage from earlier this morning, David added, producing his tablet. The children have been here since 6:47 a.m. Martinez reviewed the timestamp footage, his expression growing grimmer with each passing minute. The video showed the children's arrival, their mother's positioning on the sidewalk, and nearly 2 hours of unsupervised destruction. Mrs. Whitmore, Martinez called out, could you come over here, please? Karen approached reluctantly, her phone still recording. This is harassment, officer. He's been threatening my family for years. Actually, Martinez said, scrolling through his own files on his phone, I have records of 17 complaints you filed against Mr. Chen in the past 18 months. Noise violations, threatening behavior, suspicious activity. According to my notes, We've investigated every single complaint and found no evidence of wrongdoing. David felt a surge of vindication. Officer, I've been documenting every interaction with Mrs. Whitmore for 3 years. Would you like to see the records? Very much, Martinez replied. David opened his laptop, which he'd brought outside during the confrontation. The screen displayed a meticulously organized database: dates, times, witnesses, police report numbers, photographs, and audio recordings. Jesus, Martinez muttered, scanning the entries. You've got everything catalogued. I'm a data analyst by profession, David explained. Documentation is second nature to me. Martinez clicked through several entries, his eyebrows rising with each revelation. Mrs. Whitmore, it says here that you told the Hendersons that Mr. Chen was a registered sex offender to discourage them from buying the house next door. Is that accurate? Karen's face went scarlet. I never said that. David clicked a file, and Karen's own voice filled the air through his laptop speakers. I just think you should know, the man next door has some issues with children. I can't say more for legal reasons, but if I were you, I'd think twice about moving my family here. The recorded conversation continued for several more damning minutes, with Karen heavily implying that David posed a danger to children while carefully avoiding direct accusations that could constitute legal slander. That's taken out of context. Karen sputtered. What context makes falsely implying someone is a sex offender acceptable? Martinez asked, his professional composure cracking slightly. The gathered neighbors had crept closer during the exchange, and David could see the shift in their expressions. Mrs. Patterson's disapproval had turned from him to Karen. The Johnsons were whispering urgently to each other. Even the morning joggers had stopped pretending to stretch and were openly staring. Martinez continued reviewing David's documentation. Mrs. Whitmore, there are dozens of entries here. Complaints about his lawn height, which according to city records was always within acceptable limits. Complaints about his music, which multiple neighbors say they've never heard. Complaints about him watching your children while he was doing yard work in his own backyard. He was watching them inappropriately. Karen insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. According to this police report, Martinez continued, when we investigated that complaint, we found Mr. Chen was watering his plants while facing his garden. His back was to your property line. David watched Karen's narrative crumble in real time. 3 years of carefully constructed lies, exposed by simple documentation and professional investigation. There's more, David said quietly. Officer Martinez, Mrs. Whitmore has been running a campaign to have me removed from a neighborhood. She's contacted my employer, spread rumors to local businesses, and coordinated complaints with other neighbors. Martinez looked up sharply. Coordinated complaints. David clicked another file. Email threads appeared on screen, showing Karen organizing with 2 other neighbors to file simultaneous complaints about David's threatening behavior during a week when David had been out of town on business. This is a conspiracy, Martinez said, his voice tight with anger. Mrs. Whitmore, you've been filing false police reports for over a year. I was protecting my children. Karen shrieked, but the defense sounded hollow even to her. From a man who was watering his plants. From a man who's never had a single substantiated complaint against him in 15 years of living here. Martinez's professional mask was slipping. Do you understand the seriousness of what you've done? Karen looked around desperately, seeking support from the neighbors she'd spent years cultivating as allies. But the faces staring back at her held only shock and disgust. Even her closest friend, Mrs. Chen from 2 doors down, was shaking her head in dismay. You don't understand, Karen said, her voice breaking. He made me feel unsafe. The way he looks at us, the way he what? Martinez interrupted. Minds his own business? Maintains his property? Exists in his own home? David felt a strange mixture of vindication and pity watching Karen's world collapse. For 3 years, she'd wielded social manipulation like a weapon, turning neighbors against each other with whispered rumors and manufactured crises. Now, faced with actual evidence and professional scrutiny, her tactic seemed pathetic rather than powerful. But Martinez wasn't finished. Mrs. Whitmore, I need to inform you that filing false police reports is a misdemeanor offense. Given the volume and systematic nature of your complaints, the district attorney may choose to pursue charges. Karen's phone slipped from her trembling hands, clattering on the concrete sidewalk. Charges. But I was just trying to. David stood frozen on his deck, still holding the tablet containing 3 years' worth of Karen's documented harassment, while Officer Martinez barked orders into his radio. The domestic disturbance call had come from Mrs. Patterson across the street, but now half the neighborhood could hear Robert Whitmore's voice booming through the Whitmores' supposedly perfect colonial home. Are you out of your goddamn mind, Karen? Even from 2 houses away, David could make out individual words. Through the thin summer air. The Whitmores had always presented themselves as the ideal suburban family. Church every Sunday, volunteer coaching for Little League, elaborate holiday decorations that won HOA awards. But the voice thundering from their house sounded nothing like the soft-spoken man who'd apologized to David just weeks ago. Karen's voice rose in response, high and defensive. Robert, you don't understand what's been happening. I understand perfectly. Mrs. Patterson just filled me in on your little performance this morning. Martinez was already jogging toward the Whitmore house, speaking rapidly into his radio. Send backup to 847 Maple Street. Possible domestic in progress. Children on scene. David's stomach lurched as he remembered Karen's 3 kids, who had scattered toward their house when Martinez began questioning their mother. They were inside with whatever was happening between their parents. Should I? David started to ask, but Martinez cut him off with a sharp gesture. Stay back, Mr. Chen. Let us handle this. But David couldn't stay back, not when he could. Hear Karen's children crying through the open windows. The youngest boy's wails cut through the adult shouting like a knife, and David found himself moving toward the property line despite Martinez's orders. Through the Whitmore's living room window, David could see Robert pacing like a caged animal, his usually neat business attire disheveled, his face red with an anger that looked 3 years in the making. Karen stood in the corner, no longer the confident manipulator from the morning's confrontation, but a woman who looked genuinely afraid. 3 years, Karen. 3 fucking years of complaints from the neighbors, phone calls from lawyers, emails from the HOA, and I defended you. I actually defended you. Karen's voice was smaller now, stripped of its earlier authority. I was protecting our children. Protecting them from what? Robert's voice cracked with desperation. From David Chen? The man who helped me jump my car battery last winter? The man who shoveled our driveway when I was stuck in Detroit? Jesus Christ, Karen, what is wrong with you? David felt a chill of recognition. He remembered that snowy February morning when Robert had knocked on his door, embarrassed and apologetic, asking for help with his dead car battery. They'd stood in David's garage for 20 minutes while the car charged, and Robert had seemed like a decent man trapped in an impossible situation. I know how it looks, Robert had said that day, but Karen gets these ideas in her head, and once she's convinced herself someone's a threat. He'd trailed off, unwilling to finish the sentence. Now, through the window, David watched Robert discover the full extent of his wife's campaign of harassment. Mrs. Patterson showed me her phone, Karen. She recorded you this morning, all of it. The megaphone, the police, the neighbors finding out about your lies. Robert's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than his shouting. She showed me the part where you admitted to spreading rumors about David being a sex offender. The silence that followed was deafening. Robert, I can explain. You told our neighbors that a man I consider a friend is a child predator. Do you understand what that means? Do you have any idea what you've done to his life? Through the chaos, David heard sirens approaching, Martinez's backup arriving. But he couldn't tear his attention away from the window, where Karen was now, crying, her perfectly applied makeup running in black streaks down her cheeks. I was so sure he was watching the kids inappropriately. The way he'd stand in his yard when they were playing. In his own yard, Karen. Doing yard work in his own yard. The front door of the Whitmore house burst open, and Karen's 3 children came running out, the youngest still in tears, the oldest trying to comfort his siblings while looking around desperately for help. They ran straight to Mrs. Patterson, who gathered them into her arms like a protective grandmother. David's heart broke watching them. Whatever Karen had done, whatever Robert was doing now, these children were innocent victims caught in the crossfire of their parents' dysfunction. Martinez reached the Whitmore's front door just as Robert appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of exhausted fury. Behind him, David could see Karen slumped against the wall, her world finally collapsing around her. "Sir, I need you to calm down," Martina said, his hand resting casually on his radio. "We received reports of a domestic disturbance." Robert laughed bitterly. "Domestic disturbance? Officer, my wife has been waging a 3-year harassment campaign against our neighbor while I was traveling for work. She's destroyed relationships, spread lies, and apparently committed multiple felonies, all while I was trying to pay the mortgage and keep this family together." Martinez glanced back at David, then at the children clustered around Mrs. Patterson. "Sir, are you threatening your wife?" "Threatening her?" Robert's voice cracked again. "I'm trying to figure out how to save my marriage, my children's futures, and what's left of my reputation after my wife spent 3 years convincing the neighborhood that we are psychotic." Karen appeared in the doorway behind Robert, her face swollen from crying. "Robert, please, can we talk about this privately?" "Privately?" Robert spun around to face her. "Karen, there is no privately anymore. Mrs. Patterson told me the whole neighborhood watched you self-destruct this morning. Everyone knows what you've been doing. Everyone knows what you are." The words hit Karen like physical blows. She staggered backward, and for a moment, David thought she might collapse entirely. But then her survival instincts kicked in, and the manipulator emerged one last time. "This is all his fault," Karen said, pointing directly at David across the yard. "He never fit in here. He never tried to be part of the community. He made me feel unwelcome in my own neighborhood." The accusation hung in the air like a desperate Hail Mary pass. But this time, Karen had an audience that knew the truth. Martina said quietly. "I just spent an hour reviewing documented evidence of your harassment campaign. Mr. Chen has done nothing but mind his own business while you systematically tried to destroy his life." Robert stared at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. "Jesus, Karen. Even now, even with the police here, with the neighbors watching, with our children crying, you're still lying." Karen's face cycled through expressions: defiance, desperation, calculation, before settling on something David had never seen from her before: genuine fear. I don't know what's wrong with me," she whispered, the admission so quiet David almost missed it. "What's wrong with you?" Robert said, his voice now hollow with exhaustion. "Is that you've convinced yourself that everyone else is the problem? Our marriage counselor tried to tell me this 3 years ago, but I didn't want to believe it." Marriage counselor. David felt pieces clicking into place. The extended business trips that seemed to coincide with Karen's worst behavior. Robert's apologetic visits. The way Karen's harassment had escalated whenever Robert was out of town. "You've been trying to get help," David called out, surprising himself by speaking. Robert nodded, his shoulders sagging. "For 2 years. Individual therapy, marriage counseling, even family therapy for the kids. But Karen always had an excuse, always had someone else to blame for why the sessions weren't working." Martinez looked between them, clearly trying to process the full scope of the situation. "Mr. Whitmore, has your wife ever been violent toward you or the children?" "Not violent," Robert said carefully, "but the psychological manipulation. Officer, she convinced our youngest son that Mr. Chen was dangerous. Tommy had nightmares for months about the scary man next door coming to hurt him." David felt sick. Tommy, the 7-year-old who'd thrown dirt at his window that morning, had been taught to fear him by his own mother. She told the school that David was taking pictures of children at the bus stop, Robert continued, his voice gaining strength as he finally unburdened himself of years of secrets. She convinced the PDA that he was grooming kids by giving out full-size candy bars at Halloween. She even tried to get him banned from the community pool because she claimed he was lurking near the children's area. Each revelation hit David like a physical blow. He'd wondered why parents at the bus stop suddenly seemed uncomfortable when he was in his front yard. Why children stopped accepting Halloween candy from him. Why the lifeguards at the community pool watched him suspiciously whenever he swam laps. Karen had been systematically poisoning his reputation throughout the entire community, not just with the immediate neighbors. "Mrs. Whitmore," Martina said, his voice now carrying the weight of genuine disgust, "you've been conducting a campaign of defamation that goes far beyond property disputes. This is criminal harassment, possibly stalking charges." Karen's legs finally gave out, and she sank to her front steps, her head in her hands. I thought if I could just get him to move away, everything would go back to normal. The neighborhood would be sour. Mrs. Patterson had lived on Maple Street for 37 years. She'd seen families come and go, watched children grow up and move away, witnessed divorces, deaths, and the slow evolution of a neighborhood. At 72, she'd earned the right to speak her mind, and the phone in her weathered hands contained evidence that would end Karen Whitmore's reign of terror once and for all. "Officer Martinez," she called out, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd chaired the neighborhood watch for 2 decades. "Before you file any reports, there's something you need to see." Karen looked up from the front steps where she'd collapsed, her face streaked with mascara and defeat. "Mrs. Patterson, please. This has gone far enough." "Has it, dear?" Mrs. Patterson's tone was deceptively gentle, the way a grandmother might address a child caught stealing cookies. "Because I don't think everyone knows the full story yet." David felt a chill of apprehension. He'd gotten his vindication, watched Karen's lies exposed, seen her husband finally confront the truth. But Mrs. Patterson's expression suggested there were depths to this situation that no one had suspected. Martinez approached the elderly woman cautiously. What kind of evidence are we talking about?" Mrs. Patterson held up her phone, the screen displaying what looked like a video file. "Security footage from my doorbell camera. I've been recording everything that happens on this street for the past 4 years." Robert Whitmore went very still. "Everything." "Everything," Mrs. Patterson confirmed. "Including things that happened when you were traveling for work, Robert. Things Karen thought no one would ever see." Karen's face went white as paper. She tried to stand, swayed, and grabbed the doorframe for support. "You can't. That's private property. You can't record. Actually, dear, I can record anything visible from my front door. It's public space." Mrs. Patterson's smile was razor-sharp. "Your husband might be interested to know exactly what you've been doing while he's been trying to save your marriage." David watched Robert transform before his eyes. The exhausted, angry man who'd been defending his family's reputation suddenly looked like someone bracing for a devastating blow. "What are you talking about?" Robert's voice was barely above a whisper. Mrs. Patterson touched her phone screen, and suddenly David could hear voices coming from the device. But not just any voices. Karen's voice, crystal clear, mixed with the deeper tones of a man who definitely wasn't Robert. "Told him I was at book club again. God, he's so stupid. He actually believes me." The blood drained from Robert's face. Karen made a sound like a wounded animal and lunged toward Mrs. Patterson, but Martinez caught her arm. "Let me go. You can't show him that." "Show me what, Karen?" Robert's voice had gone deadly quiet. "What exactly has Mrs. Patterson been recording?" Mrs. Patterson looked directly at Robert with something approaching pity. "I'm sorry, dear. I truly am. But Karen's been having an affair for 18 months. With Brad Morrison from Cherry Lane." The name hit the gathering like a physical shockwave. Brad Morrison, married father of 2, Little League coach, Robert's drinking buddy from their monthly poker games. "That's impossible," Robert said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Brad's my friend. He's married to Susan. They have kids the same age as ours. He's been coming here every Tuesday and Thursday while you're traveling," Mrs. Patterson continued relentlessly. "Sometimes during lunch hours when the children are at school. Sometimes in the evenings when Karen tells the kids she's going grocery shopping." David felt sick watching Robert's world collapse in real time. The man had spent years trying to save a marriage that was already dead, defending a wife who was betraying him with his best friend. Karen was sobbing now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of someone whose carefully orchestrated lies were finally catching up with her. "Play the video," Martinez said grimly. "If this is evidence of infidelity, it might be relevant to the harassment charges." "No." Karen shrieked. "You can't. My children are at Mrs. Patterson's house," Robert said with eerie calm. "They can't hear us." Mrs. Patterson pressed play, and Karen's voice filled the summer air again. "Robert's so busy trying to fix me, he doesn't even notice I'm not broken, just bored. Brad actually listens to me, actually makes me feel alive," the male voice responded, and David recognized Brad Morrison's laugh. "Guy's an idiot for traveling so much. If I had a wife like you, I'd never leave town. Best part is, Everyone thinks I'm the perfect suburban mom. Robert, the neighbors, even that therapist he dragged me to. None of them know the real me. Robert's legs gave out, and he sat heavily on his front steps, his head in his hands. 18 months. 18 months while I was trying to. He looked up at Karen with eyes full of devastation. The marriage counseling. The individual therapy. The family sessions. You let me think I was the problem. Karen's sobs intensified. But she couldn't form words. There's more, Mrs. Patterson said quietly. Karen, do you want to tell your husband about the real reason you started harassing David, or should I? David's blood went cold. There was more. Karen's head snapped up, her eyes wild with panic. Don't. Please, Mrs. Patterson, I'll do anything. Tell me, Robert demanded, his voice like broken glass. Mrs. Patterson looked at David apologetically. I'm sorry you have to hear this, dear, but Karen's been telling Brad that you've been inappropriate with her. She's been using you as cover for her affair. The world tilted sideways. David felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. What do you mean? She told Brad that you were stalking her, making advances, that she was afraid to be alone. In her house, Mrs. Patterson continued. She painted herself as a victim being pursued by an obsessive neighbor to explain why she needed comfort and protection. David stared at Karen in horror. You used me as a fictional villain in your affair. It wasn't like that, Karen started, but Mrs. Patterson cut her off. Oh, but it was exactly like that, dear. I have recordings of Karen telling Brad that. David made sexual comments to her, that he tried to follow her into her house, that he left inappropriate notes in her mailbox. Each accusation hit David like a physical blow. Not only had Karen been destroying his reputation in the neighborhood, she'd been spinning an entirely fictional narrative of sexual harassment to justify her affair. She told Brad that all her complaints to the police were because you were escalating your behavior, Mrs. Patterson continued. That she was afraid you might become violent if she didn't take action. Robert looked between his wife and David with dawning understanding. So the harassment campaign wasn't about protecting the children. It was about creating evidence for the lies you were telling your lover. Karen's face crumpled. I never meant for it to go this far. I needed a reason to explain why I was so upset all the time, why I needed someone to talk to, so you destroyed an innocent man's life to cover up your adultery. Martinez's voice was tight with disgust. You've committed multiple felonies to facilitate an extramarital affair. David felt like he was drowning in the scope of Karen's manipulation. 3 years of psychological warfare, not because she genuinely believed he was a threat, but because she needed a fictional boogeyman to justify her relationship with another man. Where is Brad Morrison now? Martinez asked. Mrs. Patterson checked her phone. According to my security footage, he left Karen's house about 20 minutes ago. Right around the time the police arrived, actually. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Brad had been inside the Whitmore house when the confrontation started in David's backyard. He'd fled when he realized Karen's lies were being exposed publicly. Robert's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and laughed bitterly. Text from Brad. Hey man, heard there was some drama on your street. Hope everything's okay. The hypocrisy was staggering. Brad Morrison, who'd been sleeping with Robert's wife and listening to fictional stories about David's supposed harassment, was pretending to be a concerned friend. Robert, David said quietly, I'm sorry. I had no idea. Don't apologize. Robert interrupted. You've been the victim here from day one. I should have seen it sooner. Should have questioned why Karen's stories about you never quite made sense. Karen was rocking back and forth on the steps, her perfect suburban facade completely shattered. I can't. This can't be happening. My children. What will I tell my children? You'll tell them the truth, Martinez said firmly. Mrs. Whitmore, you're under arrest for filing false police reports, harassment, and defamation. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As Martinez began reading Karen her rights, David looked around at the gathered crowd. The entire neighborhood had witnessed Karen's complete destruction, her lies exposed, her affair revealed, her children's innocence shattered. But the final twist was yet to come, because David could see a familiar figure walking up the street with purposeful strides. Brad Morrison was returning to face the music, and judging by the expression on his face, he had no idea that his affair and his role in Karen's lies had already been exposed to everyone within a 3-block radius. The man who'd helped destroy David's reputation while sleeping with his best friend's wife was about to walk directly into the consequences of his actions, witnessed by the entire community he'd helped deceive. And unlike Karen's gradual, Brad Morrison walked up Maple Street with the confident stride of a man who believed his secrets were safe. At 45, he'd perfected the art of suburban deception, coaching Little League while sleeping with his best friend's wife, organizing neighborhood barbecues while systematically destroying an innocent man's reputation, playing the concerned friend while orchestrating an 18-month betrayal that had nearly driven David Chen from his home. But as he approached the crowd gathered around the Whitmore house, Brad's confident expression began to falter. Too many people. Too many phones recording. Too many faces turned toward him with expressions that ranged from disgust to anticipation. What's going on? Brad called out, his voice carrying the false concern of someone still playing his role. Robert, I got your text about drama on the street. Everything okay? The silence that greeted him was deafening. David watched from his ruined garden as Brad's eyes swept the scene, Karen in handcuffs, sitting in the back of Martinez's patrol car. Robert standing like a broken man beside his front steps, Mrs. Patterson holding her phone with the satisfied expression of someone who just delivered justice, and nearly 50 neighbors forming a circle around the unfolding drama. Robert. Brad's voice cracked slightly. What's happening, man? Robert looked up at his former best friend with eyes that had aged 20 years in the past hour. What's happening, Brad, is that Mrs. Patterson has been recording everything that happens on this street for 4 years. Brad went very still. David could see the exact moment when understanding hit, the slight widening of his eyes, the unconscious step backward, the way his hand moved to his phone as if he could somehow delete the evidence of his betrayal. I don't know what you're talking about, Brad said, but his voice lacked conviction. Mrs. Patterson stepped forward, her phone held high like a weapon of truth. Would you like me to play the recordings, Bradley? The ones where you and Karen laugh about what a fool Robert is? The ones where you discuss your Tuesday and Thursday schedule? Or perhaps the ones where you help Karen craft lies about David Chen to justify your little affair? The color drained from Brad's face. Around the circle, neighbors began murmuring, some in shock, others in vindication. David realized that several of them had suspected something but had never had proof. Brad, Robert's voice was surprisingly calm. 18 months. 18 months you've been sleeping with my wife while I was traveling, trying to save my marriage. 18 months you've been sitting in my living room, drinking my beer, pretending to be my friend. Brad's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Robert, I can explain. Explain what? Robert's composure cracked, and 3 years of suppressed rage finally erupted. Explain how you convinced my wife to destroy David's reputation. So you'd have a reason to comfort her? Explain how you helped her file false police reports to support your fictional harassment story? Explain how you let me blame myself for my marriage falling apart while you were fucking my wife in my bed. The profanity hit the gathered crowd like a physical blow. Children were quickly ushered behind their parents, but no one left. This was the kind of reckoning that people would talk about for decades. Brad looked around desperately, seeking an ally, an escape route, anything that might save him from complete social destruction. His eyes landed on David, and something desperate flickered across his features. You don't understand, Brad said, pointing at David with shaking fingers. He was harassing Karen. She was scared, vulnerable. She needed protection. From what? Martinez interrupted, stepping between Brad and David. From a man who was watering his garden? From someone who minded his own business while you and Mrs. Whitmore fabricated an entire harassment narrative to justify your affair. The officer had been listening to the confrontation with growing disgust, and now he pulled out his handcuffs. Mr. Morrison, you're under arrest as an accessory to filing false police reports and conspiracy to commit harassment. You can't arrest me for having an affair. Brad protested, backing away from Martinez. I'm not arresting you for adultery, Martinez replied grimly. I'm arresting you for helping Mrs. Whitmore craft false accusations against Mr. Chen. We have recordings of you participating in the planning of her harassment campaign. Mrs. Patterson nodded, scrolling through her phone. Oh yes, Bradley. I have lovely recordings of you and Karen discussing which complaints would be most effective. How to make David's life miserable enough that he'd move away. You were quite creative in your suggestions. David felt sick imagining Brad and Karen plotting his destruction between sexual encounters, turning his suffering into foreplay for their affair. But Brad wasn't finished. Cornered and desperate, he made one final attempt to save himself by throwing Karen completely under the bus. She's lying, Brad shouted, his voice cracking with panic. Karen pursued me. She's been obsessed with David Chen for years, sexually obsessed. She told me she fantasized about him, that she was jealous because he rejected her advances. The accusation hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Even Karen, sitting in the patrol car, looked up in shock at this final betrayal. That's not true, Karen said through the car window, her voice barely audible. Brad, you know that's not true. But Brad was beyond reason, beyond loyalty, beyond anything except saving his own skin. She made me do it. She said if I didn't help her get rid of David, she'd tell Susan about our affair. She blackmailed me into helping with the false reports. David watched the final destruction of Brad Morrison's character with a mixture of satisfaction and disgust. The man was willing to say anything, accuse anyone, destroy any relationship to avoid consequences. Robert started laughing, a broken, bitter sound that made everyone in the crowd step back. Blackmailed you. Brad, you piece of shit, you volunteered to help destroy David's life. I have the text messages. Brad's face went white. What text messages? Robert pulled out his phone, his fingers shaking with rage. The ones you sent to Karen planning your little harassment campaign. The ones she forwarded to her sister for advice. The ones her sister forwarded to me an hour ago when she heard about what happened this morning. The web of betrayal was so complex that David was losing track of who had deceived whom. But the result was clear. Every lie was being exposed, every secret revealed, every manipulation dragged into the harsh light of public scrutiny. Martinez snapped the handcuffs on Brad's wrists. Mr. Morrison, you have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you exercise that right. But Brad couldn't stop talking, couldn't stop trying to blame everyone else for his choices. This is insane. It was just an affair. People have affairs all the time. People don't usually destroy innocent lives to cover up their affairs, Martinez replied. Mr. Chen, do you want to press additional charges against Mr. Morrison for conspiracy and defamation? David looked at Brad, this man who had helped orchestrate 3 years of psychological torture while pretending to be concerned about neighborhood safety. The man who had sat in David's presence at community meetings, nodding sympathetically, while David described the harassment he was enduring. Yes, David said quietly. I want to press charges. Brad's legs gave out, and he sank to his knees on the sidewalk, finally understanding that his life as he knew it was over. His marriage, his job, his reputation, his standing in the community, all destroyed by his participation in Karen's lies. My children, Brad whispered. Susan, my children. Should have thought about that before you helped destroy someone else's life, Robert said with cold finality. As Martinez loaded Brad into a second patrol car, David looked around at the faces of his neighbors. For 3 years, many of them had avoided him, whispered about him, treated him like a pariah based on Karen's lies. Now they were seeing the truth, and the guilt in their expressions was almost as satisfying as the justice being served. Mrs. Patterson approached David, her weathered face kind but serious. I owe you an apology, dear. I should have spoken up sooner. Should have shared what I knew instead of just watching and recording. David nodded, understanding the complex position she'd been in. You spoke up when it mattered most. That's what counts. What will you do now? She asked. David looked at his destroyed garden, then at the 2 patrol cars containing the people who had made his life hell for 3 years. He thought about the years of therapy he'd need, the reputation he'd have to rebuild, the trust in his community. That had been shattered. But for the first time in 3 years, he felt free. I'm going to replant my garden, David said simply. And this time, I'm putting up security cameras. As the patrol cars drove away with Karen and Brad, the crowd began to disperse. But several neighbors approached David. People who had avoided him for years were now offering apologies, help with his garden, invitations to dinner. Robert Whitmore walked over last, his face ravaged by the destruction of everything he'd believed. About his life. David, Robert said quietly, I don't know how to apologize for what my wife did to you. What they both did. David stuttered the broken man before him. You're not responsible for their choices, Robert. You were as much a victim as I was. My children. Robert's voice cracked. How do I explain to my children that their mother is a criminal and their father was too blind to see it? You.